we go. All right. A little change of pace. If I was to put aside everything I've been talking about for the last couple months and just pretend things could keep going on and companies could learn a lesson, companies could reform. Um, this was my passion, is best practices in IT. And so when Nvidia released or at least did the paper release of the latest 30 or 3000 series, I guess you could call it, I was not that impressed. Um, and I was looking at more on the die level. I saw something that concerned me, and so regardless of all the numbers, um, I wasn't impressed with the stagnant memory size. The 10 series really moved the bar forward, along with um, the Radeon, or AMD's cards, for that generation really pushed it forward. Uh, and it's really been stagnant for a while. Consoles are starting to push the envelope. But there's another thing that concerned me is Nvidia is using um, a very large die and cutting it down to reach lower segments, and you can only go so low before your margins get too thin. And so I just want to go over the history, and I just want to more focus in on Nvidia and show how they actually did learn this lesson a long time ago, and for some reason they keep on forgetting, and they're trying to force mainstream, and push it up a price bracket, and it never works out for them. And then they give AMD a foot in the door. So with CPUs and GPUs, the idea of binning is actually a pretty old concept. And back in the olden days, it was more of just a yes or no. Yes, it passes a certain standard, or no, it doesn't. And so if you wanted to make a product for a lower segment, that couldn't afford the enthusiast class product, the flagship product you're presenting, uh, then you would take the ones that met the the standard, that they were good, and then you would cut off, you would damage a fully functional chip in order to, you could say, here you go, you wanted it for that price, now you can have that for that price. So that initial industry binning was had a bad name. It was so that I think that what really um, gave it that reputation was back in the 46 days. So Intel had a fully functional 46 DX, and to meet demands of a more mass market product, they came up with the 46 SX, which was a DX um, um, with, I think it was the math coprocessor was disabled, and they could actually then sell you, or that might have been back in 386 days, but they could sell you back on a math coprocessor um, that had been disabled. So there's been this concept isn't new. Uh, so the spiritual. Well, first of all, I'm gonna try to translate this nonsense here. So ever since Nvidia came out with the GeForce series, this kind of whatever you want to call this plan, has been somewhat followed throughout the range. So you would have the name GeForce, and then you would have these are the key things that have always been consistent. You've always had a series, and you've had a class, and then you would have a certain number. You might have a 5 and a 0, or just a bunch of zeros, or 1 0 after the class. So I just put an X there, and then you would have the series letter or letters, which also might imply the class as well, depending on the series. So some of them it was just GTX, but that some of them would have GTX and then GTS and then GT. And then it might be at the beginning, it might be at the end. So, for example, in the current series, that has moved to, go further ahead, to the front. So it used to be behind, and now it's to the front. So now you have GTX or RTX for their ray tracing series. And so we're mostly concerned about these here. So when we talk about 10 series, so we're talking about the 1030, 1050, 1060, 1070, 1080, and we're talking about the class. When I say class, we're talking about the 60 or the 70 or the 80. So in terms of the concept, the 8 class has always been the flagship. So we'll call this the flagship or enthusiast. Uh-oh, will it fit? Oh no. There we go. Now the 7 class, I would call this the open box special. So it's, if you like go in a car dealership, and we're not talking about a Civic or an Accord or Camry or whatnot. You're going to get in a luxury brand. Part of the whole concept of luxury or enthusiast is that you're getting something high end, and you're expecting it to be pricey. So if you're going into it wanting a deal, then it's like, okay, well, maybe you can get the floor model, or you can get the so it's not quite as good as this, but you want a deal, so you can get close to this. So this concept was introduced pretty early on. So if we go back to the original series, in fact, it's really, so the 6 was one of the latest classes to really be introduced. So at the beginning, you had the equivalent of an 8 class and a 5 class. So we'll call the 5 class the mass market peasants. Whatever. So this is if you can't afford. Oh. Woo. There we go. If you can't afford the enthusiast, then it was just kind of a token offering. It's like, okay, you can't afford the best, then we might cut it in half. Now, because it wouldn't make sense to take that much of a chip and just like waste so much, it justified creating another a different model of silicon that more closely met that that market segment. So, for example, back in the pre-GeForce days, you'd have the TNT2 for would be based on the NV5 silicon. But if you can't afford that, then we'll cut the memory bandwidth in half and cut back on other things, and you can save yourself a good chunk of money. It'll be a fraction of the performance of the enthusiast, but there you go, and we'll create another chip to service that market. So by the time the I would say the GeForce 3, they really kept it simple. It was the 4 where they really started trying to address different market segments, but still with one chip. Now, it was a weird transition period in this time. We were we had AGP. We had moved on from PCI, and so now we were going to AGP. But now there's AGP 8 coming out. So before PCI Express, we had a dedicated slot just for graphics card, and that was AGP. And so they had to re-release their line for support for AGP 8. So, but in essence, they had for one, they addressed the complete enthusiast class. They just had one chip for that. So in essence, yeah, the TI 4600, the 4400, the 4200. So it was, even though it's 3, it's basically just this because they're still using the same chip. And then for those that couldn't afford that, then you had the MX series, and that was in essence the 5 class. So there's still no real 6 class. The 4200 was getting close in terms of its pricing at the time. But this is where Nvidia learned a hard lesson. They invested tons of money into developing. This was their first DirectX 9 card, their 5000 series. And just to give you an example of just how much of the initial release of the FX 5800 Ultra, this was now officially when they started using this nomenclature, the 8 class. It was so bad that even Nvidia's own employees released a video mocking it. So we're going to go take a little trip down memory lane.
Gentlemen, the GeForce FX is the most powerful graphics card on the planet.
Absolutely.
It deserves an awesome cooling solution.
It does.
Guys, this is like a Porsche. It's like a Ferrari. It's like a Harley Davidson.
That's what I'm
Oh
talking
my
about.
gosh,
Yep.
think about it, guys. We could be the Harley Davidson of graphics cards.
Yeah, but dude, some people think Harleys are a bit, too noisy. Don't you think people might think this is a little too loud?
Give me that, you idiot. When people buy a Harley or they buy a Porsche, one of the main things they're looking for is that distinct noise that it makes. It's a unique sound. It's soothing.
He's totally right, dude. Think about it. You're riding on your chopper, open road, wind in your hair.
Okay, so you get the point. It was very inefficient, loud, noisy, too hot. And but beyond all that, if you look in terms of the actual the different models of chips, they were spreading themselves way too thin in terms of the number of unique silicon items they had in their product stack. So you had the NV38, you had the NV35, you had the NV30, and these weren't even just to address the different like AGP, and then as they're moving to PCI, this was like actual segmenting the class. They kept dividing up so that that's when they released a 9 series, or I guess you could say the spiritual successor of this would be the Titan. But you had different silicon for the 8 series. You had different silicon for the 7 series or 7 class. You had different silicon for the 6 class. But this was the birth of the 6 class, and so I'm gonna call this mainstream. So this is a price performance value. So this is, you get most of the performance. So you get considerably more than 50% of the 8 class performance, but at half or even less the price of the performance. So, or the 50% or less of the price of that. So this might be for the reviewers to ooh and ah over, but this is what actually people are going to buy. And so despite the 5000 series being a flop for Nvidia. Oh, by the way, I'm normally not a I told you so type of guy, but after all these years, I've been proven right. I have to stick it to some old co-workers of mine. I won't say their names, but if you see this, you know who you are. And it's not because of how wrong you were. It was because you insinuated. In fact, you didn't insinuate. You flat out told me that I was ripping someone off, because when the 5000 series came out and the competing and better Radeon cards came out at the time, I sold my 4000 series top of the end, the TI 4600. I sold it for $100, and they said, "Well, you can get the 5200, and it supports DirectX 9 for less than $100." Like, you're ripping that person off, and I was just like, So no, I did not rip that person off. I told you so. There you go. That's my maybe one told you so in my life. So, okay. So did they learn their lesson? They seem to have learned. Wow. When the GeForce 6000 series came out, the 6600 GT, so that 6 is the class. So this 6 class of the 6 series was an awesome value, and they sold like hotcakes. And if you look at now, it still looks messy when you look at the 5000 series, but if you can take out this bottom part, because with the 6000 series, there are also starting to make chipsets for motherboards, onboard graphics and whatnot. So you can just not consider these and just worry about like just the equivalent of the 8 class down to the 5 class. You can just ignore these ones. So if you look at the chips from the top down, they had discounting the AGP and PCI. They had a chip for the 8 class. They had and it covered, I mean, they still didn't learn their lesson in terms of product naming. It was a mess in this series for LE, XT, GTO, GS, GT. The 6000 series was messy for that. But in terms of consolidating the silicon, it was a big step forward. So to cover, I guess that would be especially a 7 series, they had one chip to cover that, and then they had a separate chip to cover their 6 class, and then a separate chip to cover anything lower end than that. So Nvidia realizes they can address the mainstream and sell them like hotcakes with once they hit the 6000 series. And with the 7000 series, they seem to maintain that. The 7600 GT was actually a decent card. And so here's where things seem to start going awry. Now, and aside to this, in terms of reliability, I just wanted to touch on, since we're going through GPU history, it's around the 7 and it especially reared its head around the 8 series since they ran hotter, is we're switching solder at that time throughout the industry. So it was switching from standard leaded solder to a leadless solder, which when you had a lot of thermal cycling, so something gets hot and then it cools back down, gets hot, cools back down, it made it much more likely that you'd have these fractures in the solder balls and it would become detached. And so that's when you had all this nonsense with the like people putting their cards or motherboards in ovens to heat it up. And then it would work again for a few months and then it would stop working. And I actually did that myself. And I was able to resurrect a G. It was actually a built-in 6000 series graphics chip, and I was able to resurrect it a few times before. It's like, okay, this is getting stupid. But aside from those issues, which I think were largely resolved by the time we hit the 9000 series, what Nvidia was doing with their 8000 series is they were trying to push the 6 class up. They wanted to improve their margins. So their initial release of the GTX and the 8800 GTX and the 8800 Ultra, those were the cards to get. And if you wanted to go down to the 6 class, you were seeing a pretty drastic reduction in performance compared to this. And so the spiritual 7 class, the 8800 GTS, they also reduce the total memory as well. And so, and you combine that together with the reliability issues people are having, and they were running considerably hotter, and they were increasing the average selling price. It didn't really. It initially seemed like Nvidia was trying to, like, they didn't learn their lesson until, and I remember that. I don't remember exactly which day it was, but I remember the announcement. We got a big announcement. They came out with the 8800 GT. And so even though by name it would be part of the 8 class, in terms of target market, the pricing, they said, best card for $300. And indeed, it gave you most of the performance of the GTX, but for a fraction of the price. And so when they later came out with the 8800 GTS 512, which was basically a fully unlocked version of the 8800 GT, it almost made they had gotten too far in the other direction. It made the 8800 GTX meaningless unless you needed the extra memory. So the 9000 series was basically just a refresh of that. So again, it looks like they tried to reclaim that with the 200. They went from the 1000 now back to hundreds for this. Again, this. So if we look at the chips that they used, they were trying to push the mainstream back up. They're trying to eliminate, in essence, the 6 class and get people here, buy the 7, buy the 8. So you had the these massive chips for the 285, the 280, 275, the 260. They're all based off of the same chip, the GT200. And then if you couldn't afford that, oh well, then you're stuck with the paltry GTS 250, which just a fraction of what these were capable of. And so this was another opportunity for AMD to get their foot in the door. Now, AMD clearly learned the lesson from Nvidia this time around, because they tried to compete with Nvidia and failed miserably with their what was it, the 200 series, and then they came out with the 3870, and that couldn't even compete with the 8800 GT that came out just like a month later. I remember because I immediately sold my 3870, but then they came out with their equivalent of what would be a 6S, the 4870, and they just gave up the whole flagship and they made that their focus, and those sold like hotcakes. So those were selling well. Nvidia was again trying to push the mainstream into the 7 and 8 class with one big enthusiast chip, and then just cutting it down to the market segment. And you'll see where this is all going, and why the 1060 sold like hotcakes, and why in their 3000 series presentation they weren't even talking about the 2000 series that much. They wanted to kill off this because it was such great value. And why was it such great value? Because they designed it to be. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting there. 3000 series was just an OEM thing. We can just ignore that. So, because AMD had their success, Nvidia seemed to learn their lesson again. And so with the 400 series, they had the GF 100 chip to cover the 8 and 7 class. And this has been a winning combination. Why Nvidia doesn't stick to this every time, I don't know. And they keep giving AMD a chance to get their foot in the door. So they had a chip to cover their 7 and their 8 and 7 class. And then they put out another chip, which gave you about 70 to 80, especially if you've overclocked performance, of their high end for like half the price, in the form of the GTX 460. And so that largely stayed the same with the 500 series because it was just a refresh. And they seem to have stick with that plan again with the 600 series and the 700 series. Now the 800 series was just kind of an OEM and laptop thing. So the 900 series was a very interesting thing because it was basically the pinnacle of the 28 nanometer process. The amount of efficiency they were able to squeeze out of, like the power usage of the GTX 980 was about equivalent to the 680 or the 770. The 770 is basically a 680. So it was using the same power usage, and they're using the same 28nm process, but it would give you double the performance. So this is where Nvidia, in terms of power efficiency, just blitzed past the Radeon cards. But what was also interesting is, despite them, their 8 series, because they created an ultra enthusiast chip in the form of for the Titan cards, and that now as well as the TI cards. In fact, did they have a TI back? Yeah, they did have a 780 Ti. But in terms of their main enthusiasts that they were going after, the 970 was interesting because however they were able to do it, they were able to get it down to a price that so if we go back down to a price that I don't want to watch my own stream. Okay, where were we here? Come on. In any case, here we go. I'll just go to the Steam survey here. Okay. So back in August 2016, you can see that the 970 had the top spot. And normally you don't see the 70 as the top spot because it's generally priced out of the mainstream. But if you looked at the cost of what it was around this time, and as well as at the end of 2015 and leading up to this, you could get them considerably under $400. And so in terms of price, they were basically just a slight notch above the 6 class. And so people started buying them up, even with the I think there was even a class auction lawsuit about it. The way it handled memory was weird, because both it and the 980 had 4 gigs of RAM, but the 970, because of how it was cut down, the last 5.5 gigabytes was accessed at a fraction of the speed, and so it was effectively a 3.5 gigabyte card. And so even despite that, considering how much less it was than the 980, they were able to, because of how cheap it was, they sold like hotcakes. And so even though it was a 7 class, it in terms of market, it actually ended up being closer to a 6 class. So where were we? Where's my list? There we are. So it looks like Nvidia was getting on track again in terms of marketing, and so then they just nailed it out of the park with the 10 series. So in terms of memory capacity, we saw a big move from both on AMD side. In fact, with AMD, this is what really pushed them to double their memory capacity. So you could get 8 gigs cards around this time, even though the performance wasn't, especially when we're talking about power efficiency, wasn't great compared to NVIDIA's Maxwell in this generation. They started selling 8 gig cards, and so when the 10 series and then the RX series from AMD came out, 4 gigs really became the mainstream standard. And so with the 1060, and again, that Nvidia played it well, and they had a dedicated chip to cover the 6 class, and so they could sell it at a really attractive price. Until crypto mining came along, we won't even talk about crypto mining. It's just ugh. But when the original suggested retail price under $300, I mean, it really pushed the bar forward, and they could afford to sell for that. So you think, okay, maybe Nvidia's learned its lesson, and then we come to the 2000 series /16, because then they segmented it, and that's part of the problem. So you have the RTX, and that only goes so low. Now, by name, you have a RTX 2060. So it is a 6 class, according by name. But the way they priced it as a 7 class. And so if you actually wanted to get a 6 class, in terms of with 6 pricing, you had to go for their GTX series. So they had the GTX 1660. But the GTX 1660 and the Super and the Ti didn't really push things forward that far. It wasn't that much better than the GTX 1060. And you got no extra VRAM, so there's no movement in that regard. There were still 6 gigs and just a bit of extra performance. So it wasn't worth upgrading. So there, and considering how long, like that, because of thanks to the whole crypto mining craze, yes, I said I wouldn't talk about it, but this was a very long running series. So so going from 1 year, we had that in August 2016. So in August 2016, the 1060 had just come out in July, so a month ago. So here we go 1 year later in August 2017, and already the 1060 had taken over. So it's been like this for the past 3 years. This has sat at the top of the your mainstream gamer stack. So it's had a long run, and so there was no real enticing reason to move up. They didn't really spec it in their, well, effectively the 16 series, because they segmented product line. So now here we go, 30 series. Now we're back up to current day. Here's the problem. Look at the chip. They've got the GA102 to cover their ultra high end. So now they're calling it the 9 class, which would have been the 80 Ti or 8 Ti class or Titan class before. And then they do have another chip for the 3080 got that wrong. They have the chip for both the 80 and the 90. So that for the 3080, it's not completely unlocked. So this is going to be because it's addressing now their ultra high end, the over $1,000 market. Their enthusiast class, they can't really get it much lower, and it wouldn't make sense to cut that much of the chip out for their 7 class. So they're going to have to create another chip for the 7 class, which is what they did. So now for the 6 class, how are they going to address it? So this is my lack of excitement when they're announcing it, because with the 6 class, they're unlikely going to have another do another piece of silicon just for the 6 class. So that's probably going to be a cut down 7. So they can what they're likely going to do is release another card with only 6 gigs of VRAM. So this is going to be a third generation with only 6 gigs, while the industry seems to be moving beyond that, including consoles. And especially considering how old the 10 series is at this point, I don't think there's ever been this amount of time. In fact, yeah, there's never been this amount of time that's passed in the history of graphics cards where the memory capacity had stayed the same for so long. So the 3060, the news that came out just a few days ago was they're likely just going to go straight to a super, like a 3060 Super or a TI, and come with 8 gigs, and it's just going to be a further cut down 3070. The problem is, because that's still going to be a pretty expensive chip, you're unlikely going to get it for under $400, which means you're not going to be able to hit the mainstream price point, which means they're going to go back to their old practice of to address the 300 and under market. They're going to release a chip that's significantly cut back, like and effectively a 5 class, and so it's going to leave the majority of us that live in this, again, hungering for a card that it addresses what we want at the price point we want, which is around 3. I've always said I'd never spend more than $300 on any one piece of hardware, because I've had that rule for so long. I'm willing to allow for inflation. So for me, like $399 sounds like $400. $389 sounds like you're just trying to play me by just discounting it $10. $379 finally sounds like something considerably less than $400. So if they can't get the 360 at least down to 379, and at least with 8 gigs of RAM, they haven't really provided a clear upgrade path for these masses of GTX 1060s out there. So yeah, took a while to get there, but that's my assessment of Nvidia's graphics card history and why I think they made the wrong call here. They should have they should have had a separate chip for this 60 series, and it's been a winning solution for them throughout the years. And every time they've done it, it's worked out well for them. Every time they haven't done it, and played games with the 60 series, and so you weren't getting that value, they gave AMD an opening. So AMD, if you're listening, this is your opportunity to really nail it with whatever you happen with Big Navi. But my concern is, because you've called it Big Navi, I wonder if now you're not learning your lesson, and you're going to now try chasing after the enthusiast, and you're going to try to move us people, all of us that are in this. I still have my RX 580, and you haven't given me a reason to upgrade yet. Give me a reason to move and I'm not paying $600. I'm not paying $500. Give me something considerably under 400 and I'll move. There we go. There's kind of my explanation and rant. So tomorrow I'm heading off to New York, and assuming everything goes okay, I should have another deep thoughts on Monday, and I don't know what that'll be at this point, but I'll have time to think about it over the weekend. All right, thanks, take care, and I'll see you next week.